Hi, everybody. My name is Chrissy Cataldo, and I'm the pastor and teacher at Winthrop Congregational Church, United Church of Christ in Winthrop, Maine. And I am the co-chair with my colleague Lynette George, the Reverend Lynette George, um, of the Anti-Racism Resource Team of the Maine Conference of the United Church of Christ. Thank you all for coming tonight. I am going to do some work. So I'm both running the meeting and also letting people in and out of the room. So if you see me attend to that, it means we've had some more folks show up, and I want to make sure to get them in the meeting. But we last summer, the Maine conference and Pilgrim Lodge, our summer camp, decided to join the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition. And after some conversations with some of our regular attendees to the coalition and also some organizers with Wabanaki Alliance, it seemed like a good idea to have a broader introduction to both the Wabanaki Alliance as an organization and the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition, and kind of the goals for the coalition that we have become a part of as a conference and as a camp, and also some ways in hopes of inspiring our congregations and more folks who are part of the Maine conference to be involved in the coalition. It is possible for our congregation, for individual congregations, to become part of the coalition, and there are religious communities in Maine, individual religious communities in Maine that have joined the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition. So we are really fortunate tonight that Maulian Bryant, who is the new executive director of the Wabanaki Alliance, had time and was able to come and meet with us and speak more about their good work. And I am really grateful for your willingness to meet with us tonight. So the plan is we're going to have some introduction to the Wabanaki Alliance. We're going to have an introduction to the coalition, and then Reverend Dr. Marvin Ellison is going to talk some about how the church he is a member of in South Portland has been discerning their own involvement in the coalition. And then we're going to open the floor for some questions. And so when we do questions, I'll invite you to put your questions in the chat, because I think that'll be a little easier way to, given how big our meeting is today, I think it'll be a little bit easier to organize that information. But before we go much further, I want to give Maulian a good introduction. So Maulian Bryant, formerly Maulian Dana, was named executive director of the Wabanaki Alliance in December of 2024, and she has been with the Alliance since its founding in 2020, serving for 4 years as the president of the Wabanaki Alliance Board. Bryant served as the first Penobscot Nation tribal ambassador from 2017 to 2024, having been appointed by Penobscot Nation Chief Kirk Francis. As ambassador, Bryant acted as a representative of the Penobscot Nation and liaison for the nation at the local, state, and federal levels of government in order to educate and advocate for policy and laws that impact and protect the Penobscot Nation's sovereignty, culture, natural resources, and general welfare of the Penobscot people. Prior to her work as ambassador, Bryant served as an elected member of the Penobscot Nation Tribal Council. She grew up on Indian Island within the Penobscot Nation's reservation and is the daughter of former Penobscot Nation Chief Barry Dana, who served from 2000 to 2004. Bryant graduated from the University of Maine in Orono with a degree in political science. And in 2022, Colby College presented her with an honorary doctorate for her work on equity issues and policy. I am grateful that Bryant is an outspoken advocate on the issues of derogatory mascots and imagery. Her advocacy resulted in the state of Maine enacting laws that changed the annual Columbus Day in October to Indigenous Peoples Day and prohibited public schools from using derogatory mascots. Her other passion is finding ways to strengthen and expand programs that help to preserve and teach the customs and traditions of the Penobscot people. She's a loving mother to 3 daughters and centers them in much of her work, making the state and country a safer and more equitable place for her children and all tribal people. She believes in leading with love and making progress by finding shared humanity. So I am so grateful for your presence here with us tonight and that you were able to make some time to be with us. So take it away.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. Thank you to Rich and Marvin and the two reverends. This is an incredible chance to really do some concentrated sharing to a whole big group. And I love talking about Wabanaki Alliance, and I love getting people involved. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I do have 3 daughters. They are 2, 15, and 18. So I have a wide range of activity going on in my house, and I'm in my oldest daughter's bedroom. So I'm not this cool, she is. um, So the Wabanaki Alliance, we are a 501(c)(4. In that wonderful introduction, it was mentioned we were founded in 2020, and we are a united force of the Wabanaki tribal nations within the borders of our homelands, now called Maine. And an important thing to remember is when we talk about the Wabanaki Confederacy of tribes, that goes all the way up into the maritime provinces. There's Abenaki people in Quebec that are part of our real family of tribes. So the organization of Wabanaki Alliance, we're working with the tribes that I mentioned, but the Wabanaki Confederacy is very, very big. So sometimes you might hear us say, really specify we're within Maine borders, even though our people didn't recognize borders. So I always like to sort of, lay the ground like that. And at one point in these lands of Maine, there were 26 different tribal nations at least. And through colonization and warfare and the traumatic, dark parts of our history, our people were diminished to the tribes that we have now, which can be sad and it can really be overwhelming. But also thinking about the people we have now, that's empowering and uplifting. And we've really survived so much. So I am always grateful that I get to work with these folks from these tribes and really try to advance our rights and heal some of that history that we share. So the tribes that make up the Wabanaki Alliance are my people, the Penobscot Nation. We're sort of centrally located in the Bangor area. And then over in Washington County, we have the Passamaquoddy tribe, who are the largest tribe of the Alliance, and they're split into two communities. So the Passamaquoddy tribe at Sabayak are near Eastport. They're right on the ocean. Beautiful, beautiful place. I love going there. The Passamaquoddy tribe at Medokmiguk are about an hour inland from them. They're near some beautiful lakes and they're near Princeton, Maine. And then up in Aroostook County, we have the Mi'kmaq Nation and the Holton Band of Maliseet. So as you can tell, we're very spread out. We're in different places, different, slightly different languages and families, even though we have cousins all over and we're, tightly connected to each other. We are really distinct communities. However, even though we don't always agree on everything or work on everything together, we have found a real synergy and common goal around the restoration of the recognition of our inherent tribal sovereignty. And this fight, for lack of a better word, it feels like a fight, is a very unique one to the state of Maine. We have a unique set of policy and jurisdictional circumstances, and the Wabanaki Alliance was really formed to work on fixing that together, not just the tribes, but with state lawmakers, and eventually so many other people throughout the state of Maine. So, the real reason for some of these unique and restrictive circumstances date back to a set of laws from 1980. And we have, throughout the 70s, we have federal recognition, which we can get into a little bit what that means, of the tribal nations. And we have, some real organization, I think, of the tribes and understanding our continuous governance and what it's like to restore our cultural programs and really bounce back from some of the horrors of history. You're seeing a real resurgence in the 1970s of being proud to be Indigenous. There's a movement called the American Indian Movement that's happening nationally. And in this era, the Passamaquoddy tribe figured out that roughly two-thirds of the state of Maine was illegally taken from Wabanaki nations. The treaties that oversaw a lot of these land transfers were never ratified by the federal government. So, after some legal shuffling and verifying this in the courts, a lawsuit ensues, and it's the federal government with the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, and Maliseet, the Mi'kmaq for circumstances of that time weren't involved in this settlement act. They came into play a little bit later. And the tribes and the federal government sue the state of Maine over claims to all of this land. a really substantial piece of what we now know as Maine. And full disclosure, I was born in 1984. I wasn't around, but I hear from different people in my family a lot of different points of view, that this was a really tense time, that you had people throughout Maine like sitting on their porches with guns, thinking that quote unquote the Indians were going to come take their land back. So lots of ill will and fear and racism, and people not really coming together to understand what's going on, just a lot of like knee jerk reactions to a lot of this stuff. So the state of Maine came into this lawsuit as the party in the wrong, right? And they did an admirable job of negotiating this in a way that left them not having spent any money on the settlement, besides their legal fees, which of course were probably substantial, but also placing some real jurisdictional controls and oppressive language in this settlement. So we have this factor of President Jimmy Carter being in office, the writing sort of on the wall that Ronald Reagan will succeed him. And so there was this real pressure on the tribes. President Carter is likely to sign something like this. He wants to help. He wants to help find a solution. Future President Ronald Reagan has had made comments that he would likely not be signing these land claims cases or finding some solutions. So the tribes were really up against it. They were told, you may not get anything if you walk away from this deal. So the tribes took this deal. And even though I'm going to talk about the problems, I never want it to seem like I judged those tribal leaders for making this decision, or that I think they did a bad job, or that I think it was the wrong thing to do. I think it's none of my business because I wasn't there. I also think they absolutely did the best they could with the information that they had. And when you think about this history I've alluded to, all of these Wabanaki people that used to be here dwindled and attacked and under warfare. You have sort of the initial colonization with wars and disease. Then you have bounties put on our people, and the settlers in the 1700s are instructed to go hunt our people. You have that sanctioned by the government. After that era, you have the taking of our children to put into government-run boarding schools. And then you have the outlawing of our religion. So when you really strip a people of so much, they're not left with a whole lot. So our communities were in poverty. Some people lived in tar paper shacks in these harsh Maine winters. And when you have tribal leaders faced with, you could get some land back, you could get some resources, you may have to deal with some potentially problematic language that we'll figure out with lawyers later, that probably seemed like an okay deal, instead of having to walk away with potentially nothing and having to face your people, and that sort of disappointment. So I always like to really give context for this decision, because I'm about to really say everything that was wrong with it. So I never wanted to feel judgy or wrong, because I don't think it was. So the result of this settlement was the tribes were given pots of money to buy back land from the federal government, or buy back land in the state to put in trust with the federal government and expand the land base. These, they called land acquisition funds, are held with the tribes. We can use them for a few different purposes, but they're pretty well restricted. If we make any, in our tribe, Penobscot Nation, if we make any decisions about land, you need 9 votes of our 12-member council, and that has to deal with that fund. So it's kind of tightly controlled, this land acquisition fund, in this process. So it met the sort of baseline almost of dealing with land and money, because that's what this lawsuit was about. Also, the state was able to, they came into these negotiations with the attitude of, we don't want to create nations within a nation, which is exactly what tribes are supposed to be in the rest of the country. That's what they are. But the state of Maine had a lot of resistance to that, because they had really benefited from the system they had set up since statehood in 1820. So in 1820, when Maine became a state, separated from Massachusetts, they were supposed to take on the treaty obligations that Massachusetts had to the tribes. They did not. And this may sound familiar because those treaty obligations were included in the original Maine state constitution. And about 50 years after it was ratified, the state decided to take that treaty language out of printed copies of the constitution. So it remained in effect, but you couldn't read it or see it anywhere. So, in the last session of the legislature, we actually passed a bill to restore that language in printed copies, and that went out to the full state for a referendum, and we won overwhelmingly. I think we were in the 70%. So, people wanted to see that language in our printed constitution. So, that felt good for us. What doesn't feel good is thinking about how the state of Maine basically ignored that treaty language. And because of all this theft of land, Maine was able to set up a system where the tribes are basically wards of the state. They had people called Indian agents in communities, and tribal members had to go to them to get permission to buy groceries and goods and clothes. The government would ship large quantities of really cheap, fattening food to reservations. So you may have heard of fry bread. Fry bread is out of this era. So fry bread is exactly like it sounds. It's a really simple dough, just a few ingredients, and they're cheap ingredients, and they were the foods that were being trucked into communities, and you fry it up in lard or vegetable oil, and it's just a quick carby, not very good for you meal, but it became a survival food, and it became something very, I think, precious to us in a way, even though it was giving folks diabetes and heart disease at very high rates. It's part of this real contrast in our experience is we've had to embrace things to survive that also haven't been all that good for us, but we've taken them on and made them parts of our culture and points of pride. So I love fry bread. I eat it once in a while, and and that's that. So the state of Maine had really enjoyed the power it had created. And in this settlement, the lawyers were able to negotiate a few different things that were problematic for the tribes. One of them is there's language throughout the settlement that refers to tribes as basically having a municipality status. So this is different from other tribes in the country because in other tribes, you would see tribes have jurisdictional control over their people, natural resources, civil and criminal jurisdiction in their tribal courts, fishing regulations, and such. With the tribes in Maine, we've been under state jurisdiction with a lot of that. And then the relationship with the federal government has really come second, even though we're federally recognized tribes. And when I say federally recognized tribes, that means we've met a criteria with the federal government to be recognized. And that can happen through a lawsuit, like it did with a couple of our tribes, through an act of Congress, or through an application with the Department of the Interior. So there's the tribes that I mentioned, the Wabanaki Alliance, are all federally recognized. The other piece of this settlement that kind of came back to bite us was there's a clause added. Some say it was added at the 11th hour and that not everybody knew it or understood it. But this clause essentially blocks the tribes in Maine from having access to laws passed at the federal level to benefit tribal nations. So since 1980, the tribes in Maine, any piece of federal legislation that's been passed, if it seems to preempt or impact state jurisdiction, the tribes in Maine don't have access to it. And I'll give a quick example because it tells sort of a journey of a bill to a law that really encapsulates some of this struggle. So the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization in 2013, this was really important because tribes had not been mentioned in this law previous to this. And throughout the country, we have this crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And part of that crisis, part of the problem is jurisdictional confusion, where if a domestic violence situation happened in a tribal community and the perpetrator wasn't a tribal member, the tribal court couldn't hear that case. So, in the process of figuring out where these cases go, is it a district court or the closest county? A lot of times they just got dropped, and these cases were never really seen through to a place of justice. So in 2013, in that reauthorization, there was language specifically to extend this jurisdiction to tribes with tribal courts. So the Wabanaki nations thought we were okay to start using this law, and the Penobscot Nation actually got picked to be part of a pilot program to, study this implementation of this law in tribal communities. In 2015, the state of Maine, under then Attorney General Janet Mills, of course, our current governor, stepped in and stopped us from accessing that law, saying they had concerns it would impact or affect state jurisdiction or preempt them. So, as early in my term as ambassador, we got to work on a state bill trying to fix the situation. And current Senator Rachel Talbot Ross, who used to be the speaker, before that was a representative, she put in a bill for us to have VAWA, that's the acronym, the Violence Against Women Act, apply to tribes in Maine. And this law, start to finish, when we got it passed, the whole, not just the work on this law, but since we got to 2015, it took 7 years to make this all happen. And there was tense negotiations with the governor. She ended up signing it. We're very happy that she did. But I remember having these long days in the Judiciary Committee where they hear most of our bills. And there was so much concern for the perpetrators and the domestic violent, offenders and the people that would have their potential trials in tribal court. And there was just all this discussion about if it was going to be fair, if they were going to get appropriate sentencing, and where that might happen. And I had to get up at the table once, even though they didn't ask me. I rose my hand, and I just said, I need you all to remember the incidences of domestic violence in my community, and we've gotten no justice for them. And there's all this concern about the people doing these crimes, but where is the concern for the nameless and faceless victims throughout the years that have suffered because we haven't had this jurisdiction? And I'm so happy they passed the law and the governor signed it, and that was a huge step forward. We also got mentioned at the federal level. We have our congressional delegation has some real champions and representatives, Golden and Pingree. They really go to bat for us time and time again. And all of them, senators included, were able to agree that we should be named in the federal VAWA statute as well. So that's sort of a way around the language from 1980. We can be specifically named in these federal laws. So that's one long story about some of these issues with the Settlement Act. And in 2019, we had so many friends in the legislature that were coming to us, with these bills to repeal the Settlement Act, to change it in 18 different ways. And there was sort of all this legislation flying around. We had a new governor in Janet Mills. We had Democrats in control of the House and Senate, so they really thought they could get something done. And former Speaker Sarah Gideon and former Senate President Troy Jackson were pretty progressive and collaborative in their leadership, I think. They brought together all of the tribal leaders. I was the ambassador then, and so the chiefs, the vice chiefs, representatives, ambassadors, we all got together, and they basically said, what would you all like us to do on this? How would you like to work with us? And from that meeting and some conversation afterwards, they issued a joint resolution to call together a task force of tribal leaders, of state leaders, Maine Indian Tribal State Commission, the governor's office, attorney general's office. They created this task force that met 6 times or so. And Chief Francis served from our community, and I was sort of an alternate, but he went to every session, so I didn't get to play, but I was there all the time. And this group studied federal Indian law. They heard from experts. They talked amongst each other. They heard from the tribal chiefs, and they produced a slate of 22 consensus recommendations. And when I describe the membership, I should say that Maine Indian Tribal State Commission, the Attorney General's office rep, and the governor's office rep were all present but didn't vote on those recommendations. So, of the voting members, these are consensus recommendations. And these recommendations are all amendments to the 1980 Maine Indian Land Settlement Act. Some have to do with access to federal Indian law, jurisdictional things. There was one specifically about gaming, which is its own creature, and we've always run bills sort of separate from the larger bill. And this group of recommendations has taken the form of a lot of different pieces of policy over the years since 2019. And throughout this work, we sort of throw around the term, oh, the task force, the task force, but it's like kind of a long time ago now. So we're getting away from people like freshly knowing what that was. So very happy to take the chances when I can to explain that whole process. So thank you. And so we first had a very large bill. It was LD 2094 of the 129th legislature. And this was a big omnibus bill of like all of those recommendations. And we hadn't passed the VAWA law yet, so that was still in there. And we took gaming out. Gaming's always been separate. So all of the other recommendations besides gaming were in this bill. And we got a vote out of the Judiciary Committee. We had a public hearing and got a good vote. And then COVID shut down the world and the legislature and all that good work. So we came back with the effort, LD 1626, which a lot of folks might be more familiar with. And that was also a large piece of omnibus legislation. In a previous legislature, that gaming bill that gaming recommendation I talked about, it's basically to have the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act apply to the tribes in Maine, because that's one of those laws that doesn't. And I think a lot of people sometimes have this idea that Indian gaming means the federal government tells tribes they can just go put up a casino on every corner, and it's sort of an authorization to go do that. But IGRA, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, is actually a restrictive act, and it gives the tribes sort of the power, for lack of a better word, to negotiate with state governments compacts around gaming. So that's essentially what we asked the legislature to do. This bill passed the House and Senate, got vetoed by the governor. But in her veto letter, she said, I would like to work with you all on some sort of gaming, which is big for the governor. She's not a fan of gaming. So for her to say, I don't like this, but I might like something else, we took that as progress. So in the session with 1626, the large omnibus bill, the governor did not like that bill. She thought it was too broad, too much, too soon. It would create confusion. This is sort of what we hear from her and others a lot of the time. And she was kind of in a parallel track negotiating with us LD 585, which did pass and was signed into law, and that authorized a new collaboration policy between the tribes and the state. When Paul LePage was governor, he had rescinded a consultation order. So that kind of reinstated something that looked like that. It also extended some taxation provisions, which was part of those task force recommendations. So now we are able to have more control over taxing people on tribal lands by tribal governments. And also the gaming piece, it extended rates to the revenue of the newly legalized online sports betting industry. So those three pieces we did get passed. We also passed a really important bill to the community of Sabayak, who, and it's a human rights crisis, really. They don't have clean drinking water in 2025, and they haven't, I don't know if they ever have had clean drinking water. And part of the problem is these restrictions in the 1980 Settlement Act. They can't put land into trust where they need to build or dig a new well, because they need approval by the town of Eastport. And basically the way land into trust goes for tribes in Maine, surrounding towns have veto power over our land into trust applications with the federal government. So other tribes throughout the country don't have that step with local towns, which is why you may see some reluctance in Carrabassett Valley to our legislation, because they're worried that Penobscot Nation would put land into trust that we own there without their approval, basically. So lots of complicating layers to this. But that was a great bill. The governor signed that into law, and it helps the Passamaquoddy tribe at Sabayak start their journey of achieving clean water. They have a ways to go, but at least now some policy fixes are in place. We've had other sort of ups and downs over the past few years. We've extended restoration of some criminal jurisdiction in our tribal courts. That was a big success for us. We actually did a report, the Wabanaki Alliance commissioned the Harvard researchers to basically look at, from an economic perspective, answer the question, does the 1980 Act hold us back? And what does that look like? And what could it mean for not just tribal communities, but surrounding communities throughout Maine if we had a full restoration of our rights and sovereignty? And the Harvard reports on our website, it basically proved what we thought to be true, that we are held back from that 1980 by that 1980 Act, and that we could really bring a lot of folks along with us if we were able to do better economically. And part of that report that's really cool is it looks at tribes throughout the country and looks at what kind of spells success for tribal nations. And it's not gaming, it's not businesses really, it's the tribal courts. If tribes have functioning and well-run tribal courts, that's a key indicator for success for them. So something about having that jurisdiction empowering your community to handle your own affairs legally, that's a really good thing for tribes. So in last session, we passed LD 2007, which restored a huge group of felony jurisdiction or felony crimes to tribal courts. So now we can handle those cases along with the Violence Against Women Act cases. So we've had those successes. We've had some failures. We got a bill to restore access to federal Indian law. And I use the word Indian, and I do air quotes sometimes because we don't really call ourselves that. But thinking about these laws and the language of the government, they say Indian a lot, and it is officially called federal Indian law. So this bill, we had done a lot of good work with Republicans. We had a big fancy event where we honored some of them and really started making some good relationships. So this bill to restore access to federal Indian law, we had a 2/3 vote in each chamber going through. So we were really hoping if the governor vetoed it, we could maybe override it. And she vetoed it, but there were kind of other factors at play. And I think 12 of those Republicans in the House changed their vote. So we didn't get that veto override, but it felt like good progress. We had really kind of tapped into a place we hadn't before. And I still have great working relationships with a lot of those Republicans. And I'll be tapping them on the shoulder soon to see where they're at this time around. So where we are now is we have a new slate of bills going forward. We're still looking at those two areas. We have some other more tribal specific priorities. We have a lovely bill tracker maintained by volunteers on our website. And a key piece of all of this has been our Wabanaki Alliance Coalition. And back in 2020, we had some faith groups and environmental groups and different people, allies that have been doing this for a really long time and wanted to be involved. And we were meeting kind of, regularly, but not all that organized. And then we hired John Diefenbacher-Krall as our executive director, and he had this really robust community organizing background. So we thought, John, why don't you make this coalition your baby and see what you can do with it? And he ran with it. Like, boy, did he ever. He, we started with maybe 10 groups or so on the high end, and now there's over 300 official organizations supporting this. We have a coalition that meets every 2 weeks. That Rich and Marvin, I see them there, and that working group is working so hard. They're divided into teams. We have a communications team, a field team, a coalition building team, a state house team, and a new fundraising team. we hired an amazing associate director, Monica Castellanos, who has some strong fundraising background. So she's leading that brand new team. And it always just blows me away that folks show up every 2 weeks like clockwork, and then in between those meetings they're meeting in these teams and advancing this work. So I cut my teeth a long time ago on all of this. As a teenager, I got activated to speak out against these harmful stereotypical mascots. I was, upset seeing the things my dad was dealing with as chief and these really unjust lawsuits while he was trying to keep our river clean. And if you would have told me back then that I would get to talk to hundreds of Mainers every 2 weeks who wanted to help us, I would have laughed and cried and thought that that'll never happen, but I'd be so happy to see that. So this is really, it doesn't even feel like work for me. It really feels like such a dream come true that people care about this. It always amazes me because you really don't have to. We are such a small part of the population. We're not that big or powerful or influential, but I think when we speak about our experiences, people hear that we've been here for a really long time. They hear this connection to this place and these lands and these waters. They hear our kind of ancestors speaking through us. And that's really powerful because people have come to love this place of Maine so much. So we're just happy that even after what we've all been through together, we can still advance some really good work and carry with us the resiliency and that just good stuff that's helped us persevere through so much. So that might be a good place to turn it over. We have a lot of work left to do, and I'm just really thankful we have such a large coalition of helpers to help us do this.
Wonderful. So Marvin and I were talking in chat, and we've decided that's probably best. It's about 7:42, and we want to make sure everybody gets the good stuff, right? So why don't we have them ask you, if you have questions that you'd like to ask Molly and Bryant, go ahead and put them in the chat. And what I'll do, the two of us will work together to go through those. So if you have some questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, and we're going to proceed through them and get through as many as we can in a decent amount of time. I'll go ahead and ask one, I think. If what are some things that you hope for folks as they come? So our conference has joined the coalition, and you said it's really like it's been so good to see so many folks who want to stand with Wabanaki nations. What are some things that you hope that any institution that decides to join the coalition, what are some things that you hope they will learn or be inspired to do while being part of the coalition?
Yeah, I think so. I'm really of the mindset that I love to embrace people wherever they are at, and whatever they can give. I think whether that's showing up to the meetings and trying to be on a team and seeing where you fit in there, or if it's writing a letter to the editor and learning about these issues and framing it in a way of, this is why I care about this because this is where I'm from and this is what this stuff means to me. Or showing up to testify on a bill. One really, positive thing about the pandemic is all legislative proceedings are now also available remotely. So I think that had been a barrier before. If you couldn't drive to Augusta, you couldn't speak in person about a bill, but now all of these proceedings are on Zoom, or you can submit written testimony. The clerks are all great in all the committees, and the portal's really easy to use. And we're here to guide folks through that. If, any help on letters to the editor, submitting testimony, and it could be holding an event in your town. It could be going to Wabanaki events and supporting artists. And there's just, I think no matter where your interests may lie, there's probably something going on with Wabanaki people that you could learn about and become engaged in.
Wonderful. And so I see that Malcolm has a question. Malcolm serves in Orno. What does organizational membership in the coalition mean?
Yeah, so we're not a membership organization, so there's no dues or things like that. I call us supporters, different organizations that want to show up. It basically means we have kind of different levels of support. You can get on our email list, so you're just sort of in the know when things go on. You could join the coalition with your organization and come to these biweekly meetings. I would love to have you, even if you can't commit to those meetings or being on a team, because you never know when an email might jump out at you like, oh, there's a lobby day, I can get to that, or I
Mhm.
can go testify on that bill. So I would say at the very least, join that email list, and then you can gauge sort of what your involvement can be.
Wonderful. If you have a way that people can easily join that email list, is it something I can put in the chat, or is it something you know off the top of your head?
It's
Is it on the
on,
coalition website?
yeah, it's on the website. It's not the most obvious thing. I
All
think I
right.
can get
All right. If you can't get it, I'll dig around while Marvin's talking and I'll see if I can find it.
it.
All right. And so Kat has a question. Kat wondered, where do things stand with tribal sovereignty at this point? And asked, how can we support it? How can we, I think Kat might mean as churches or people who are involved in churches who are not Wabanaki, maybe some priorities. I don't know, Kat, does priorities seem like kind of the question that you're asking?
Yeah. I just found the email sign up. I put that in the chat.
Thanks.
So yeah, we do have some priorities this session. We have sort of the two big things I talked about, the omnibus bill with a lot of those recommendations and the specific bill to federal Indian law. Those are both sponsored by Senator Rachel Talbot Ross right now. They will likely be carried into next year so that we can time that up with the governor's race, and we can also have an extra year to really educate lawmakers about a lot of these things. So those are two big efforts to look for, and I don't know that will move the governor, but I do know that we're having a lot of good meetings with a lot of lawmakers already, and maybe we could override a veto if it came to that, but those two big bills are in the mix. We also have something I haven't really touched on yet. We have a new Wabanaki Studies bill that we're really excited about. So there's a law on the books from 2001. My great aunt Donna Loring was our tribal representative at the time, and she's now the Penobscot Nation board member and the Wabanaki Alliance. So just really great to have her around, and all of her institutional knowledge and just yeah, if you know Donna, you know what I'm talking about. Lots of strong personality. So she got a bill passed in 2001 that requires the teaching of Wabanaki studies in Maine schools. And a big part of why she got it passed is because it didn't cost the state anything. There was no fiscal note on it. So we have sort of an unfunded mandate that's historic and awesome, but no teeth to really implement it.
Mhm.
So in 2021, and the 20th anniversary of this law, the Wabanaki Alliance, the ACLU of Maine, Maine Indian Tribal State Commission, and Abbey Museum, we came together and did a research project to see how schools were implementing this law and if they were implementing the law. So we picked, I think it was like 12 schools to look at throughout the state, some near tribal communities, some rural, some urban, and it was pretty spotty across the board. Not a lot of teachers had access to great resources, not a lot of implementation of this law. So, in the time since 2021, Portland Public Schools has developed a beautiful curriculum that I think is just really, really well done. And the state of Maine brought on a Penobscot Nation citizen and educator as their Wabanaki Studies specialist in the DOE. And she came on to work on those Moose modules, those online learning things during the pandemic. So she's really expanded that work. Her name's Bree Lowler, and she's just done some wonderful collaborative work as a tribal citizen, bringing together a lot of tribal experts and culture holders. And I believe her position is sort of in flux because she was brought on with the COVID funds and the ARPA era in government. So our new Wabanaki Studies bill is seeking to kind of make her work more permanent in statute and really boost that 2001 law. And so that is out there from Rep. Lori Osher, and these bills will all be on our bill tracker at some point if they're not already. We also have a bill with House Minority Leader Billy Bob Fockingham sponsoring it. And when we first started to get to know him, he really keyed in on this eminent domain piece of everything. So in other places throughout the country, it's very hard, if not impossible, for state governments to seize tribal lands through eminent domain. In Maine, that's not the case because of the 1980 Settlement Act law. So we have a bill in LD 958 to basically remove the ability of the state to seize tribal lands through eminent domain, and that's with Rep. Flockingham. So those are just a few of the things we have going on, but that bill tracker will list everything.
For those who hadn't seen in the chat yet, I did put the bill tracker in the chat, so you can find that. I will. Brad Hurst had a good idea. I have a few of the links that we've talked about. I'll put together an email out to everybody who registered for the event, so that way you'll just have those handy in case you didn't snag them out of the chat. Pam and Bruce Burnham, they have a question for bills and legislation in the future. They're thinking about language. Is there preferred language to use other than Indian that we can all promote and work for? And like in our I would add probably not just in legislation, but in our own advocacy for writing letters and things like that.
Yeah, it's a great question and one that I think about a lot. I think if you got 100 tribal people in a room and asked them each how they wanted to be identified, you might get 110 different answers. So this is what I think and feel, but I think it's shared by a lot of people. I most of the time, a lot of us don't use the word Indian. We usually identify ourselves as our tribes at first. And then obviously we're all Wabanaki. We belong to the big confederacy. And the word Wabanaki comes from the word Wabanaki, which means people of the dawn land. So, where we are in Maine, the sun rises first, and that's sort of where we pull our name from. So there's so much meaning in our own languages that a lot of us will go to that first, our nation, and then our confederacy. But you have some people that like the word Indian and they feel like we've reclaimed it and made it a thing of pride. Indigenous is also something that I like to use. It feels good. It feels like it really honors the long time we've been here. Over
Mhm.
10,000 years our people have been here. So that feels good to me. Native American, some people like it, some people don't because our nations predate America. So that doesn't quite feel right or quite capture it. But I think I always say if you're asking the question, you're halfway there.
Yeah,
You're on the right track if you're caring about that sort of thing.
yeah. And I'll just point out something I've noticed too. Sometimes there's like official names of the nations in the Confederacy, and sometimes that's different than the colloquial names that people might
Mhm.
use or the names in the same language. And so sometimes it might be appropriate to use the legal name, a Holton Band of Maliseet Indians, and sometimes it might be a more colloquial word or a more informal word might also be. I don't know. Does that feel right too? Does that feel like something that needs to be kept in mind too?
Yeah, we all have our sort of, you're right. The way I say Penobscot is an anglicized
Mm,
thing. So we would
yeah.
say Penobscot in our language. So you're right. There are even variations in what we call ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, right. So, well, thanks. Does anybody else, right now I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Okay. Yeah, we got some more. Great. Okay, let's see. Nancy asked, in our travels, we've been introduced to the term First Americans and wondered if that is something that is more, or that is used here.
Yeah, I hear that in Canada a lot. They call their Indigenous people First Nations.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I don't know that I know anybody that says First Americans. But I've heard it before.
Okay. Well, thanks. And Marvin pointed out that there's a style guide on the Wabanaki Alliance website. Good job, Marvin. Marvin, good catch. So, if there are, I'll tell you what. If other folks have questions you think of, please put them in the chat. But why don't we, in the absence of more, why don't we have Marvin come on just a minute? And I figure we can have. It's currently 7:54. I don't want to keep people super long, but we'll have. So Marvin is a member of a congregation here in Maine, and that has been discerning how to support sovereignty for a while. And I asked if he'd be willing to talk for just a few minutes about the process that he and his congregation have been using. And I just saw that Marvin's pastor Allison is here as well. And Allison, I didn't ask you this beforehand, but if you want to tag in and say a few words, you're welcome to. But Marvin, thanks for preparing a few words about the process of your church.
Sure. Thanks, Chrissy. And Maulian, thank you so much for uh, speaking tonight with this group. I've been looking forward to this conversation very much. The head count at this point of member organizations of the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition is 320 and counting. And about a quarter, maybe a little bit more of the membership in the coalition are faith-based organizations. Maine Council of Churches is a member. The Episcopal Diocese of Maine is a member, but so are a number of Episcopal parishes. The statewide network, social action network of the Unitarian Universalists is a member organization of the coalition, but also a number of UU congregations. And I mention this because while I think it is absolutely splendid that the main conference, UCC, has joined the coalition, it is also a wonderful opportunity for many of our UCC congregations to step up. And that's important for a number of reasons, including it's always advantageous that legislators and a governor who is not always as sympathetic as we might like on these issues to understand how broad the base of support is uh, for Wabanaki sovereignty rights and so forth. So that's kind of a pitch of encouraging us to think about how in our congregations we might have conversation about what it would look like for us as a congregation to become a member of the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition. So I'm a member of First Congregational in South Portland. We have not joined as a congregation, and I'll explain I think why we haven't taken that step. What we have done is our mission and social witness team has joined the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition. And we decided to take that step out of our own experience with justice making around LGBTQ rights. When going through the O&A process, we thought similarly, we don't want to join the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition just as a pro forma matter of taking a vote and then not living out that commitment more deeply. So at First Congregational in South Portland, we've made a commitment to engage in some ongoing education about these matters, as well as explore ways we can partner with organizations like the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition. And I'll mention at least one other community partner, and how we could do some advocacy in the legislature. All of that good work of both reckoning and repair is ongoing, whether we've joined as a congregation formally or not. What we're anticipating is either at this year's annual meeting or probably at the latest a year from now, the congregation will be asked to take a vote to join the coalition as a congregation, which is sort of the next step of living more deeply into that. Well, First Congregational, like many UCC congregations in Maine and elsewhere, has a history of involvement in social justice advocacy and a variety of community ministries. But it was only very recently, or I should say it was until recently, we hadn't stopped and examined our own history as a congregation founded in 1733 on unceded land of the Wabanaki Confederacy. But a number of us began to have conversation that the time has come for us to engage in that exploration of our own history of involvement with the Wabanaki people and to explore not only what reckoning with that history would uncover, but how it might also help us to think about how we could enter into more respectful, more just, more sustainable connections with the Wabanaki and other indigenous peoples. So one of the things folks do, we formed a committee, or actually a working group. We have a Wabanaki Allies working group. There are about 15 to 20 folks who meet at least monthly to do work together, to do some program development, to do some organizing around educational events, and to have conversations about these matters. So let me just very briefly talk about some things we're doing inside the congregation and some things we're doing in the wider community. Back in 2020, we started some educational work, and we invited 4 other congregations in the area. We were the only UCC congregations in that group to engage the Wabanaki Reach to do a workshop for us on Wabanaki, Maine history that provides an overview of 400 years of colonization of Wabanaki by European settlers that then examines the impact of that history and asks, what now do we need to be doing to set things right? And we've also sponsored a couple of book discussions. But in 2024, our mission and social witness team joined the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition. And then our working group began in earnest to think about how to engage more of the congregation in these conversations. And one of the things we settled on is we collected 3 dozen land acknowledgement statements so that we would have a diverse sampling of those land acknowledgements from Maine organizations, everything from the Portland Public Library to USM to Bowdoin and Colby, as well as from congregations. And then we asked our church council and our various church committees to start meetings by first reading a land acknowledgement and then having some time together to debrief what people heard and what they responded to. And the report we're getting is that that's been a really rich time for engagement and reflection and to increase the interest, the curiosity, the desire to do more. And we've also then regularly used land acknowledgements in public worship. We're going to follow up in this coming year with another workshop by Wabanaki Reach, this one on decolonization and the role of faith communities. So, and again, we're going to partner with a number of other congregations to offer that workshop. I think Maulian really expressed well what you can do if you join the coalition. I've got some time on my hands, so I'm able to do the regular meetings and participate on the coalition building team. Rich is also involved. One of the things we also do is we do tabling at events around the state for the Wabanaki Alliance and provide handouts and are there to answer questions that people have about the coalition and the work of the alliance. We're also partnering, in addition to the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition, with an organization you may know here in Maine called Atlantic Black Box. That's a network of historians, both professional and amateur historians, that are seeking to recover and reckon with New England's role in both the slave trade and colonization. They've been engaging partner organizations in various parts of the state to do walks and to investigate the connections with the land and with the people in terms of this long history uh, in New England. So right now, the two things that I think we're going to be devoting some time and energy to is because our 300th anniversary as a congregation is coming up in 7, 8 years. That gives us some lead time to do more research about our early history. And especially some of the history that is not very savory, and to explore what that then asks of us as we mark that 300th anniversary. We're also spending some time to educate ourselves about legislation pending in Augusta that Maulian was talking about, and about how we can testify in Augusta, how we can speak with our legislators, how we can write letters to the editor and find other ways to make a difference. So I'm very excited about having this connection. And I encourage you to think about, if not joining the Wabanaki Alliance Coalition, at least attending a meeting or two and finding kindred spirits who love doing this justice work together, as well as building these amazing relationships. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and I don't want you to miss out. So I encourage you to take whatever the next step looks like that you're considering.
Thanks, Marvin. So if you want to know more about what it means for individuals to be part of the coalition and attend coalition meetings, I know that Marvin and Rich Stewart, you can see, if you guys would put your email addresses in the chat, so people, please reach out to Marvin and Rich. I know that they would love to talk more about their experience being, I'm sorry, my dog is making a very strange noise. You might be able to hear it on the recording. If I know that Marvin and Rich are happy to share their experience on what it means for them to be part of and go to the coalition meetings. And if you want to get involved in, as Maulian said, in just in the legislative pieces individually on your own, they always need letters. They always need people who are willing to meet with legislators. And if you get connected with the email list, organizers can find you, or you can tell me and I can tell organizers where to find you, because sometimes they reach out to me for help too. We have a lot of good work that we can do together. Maulian, thanks again so much. It has been a gift to have you here with us tonight. And thanks all 50 odd of you who are able to attend tonight. As I said, I'm trying to get a good collection of the links shared, and I will send those out to everybody who signed up. And Marvin, let's see. Marvin, you got a question?
Oh, I wanted to, I failed to mention that one of the things the Wabanaki Allies Working Group at First Congregational in South Portland has done is developed a Wabanaki Allies page on the church's website. And on that page is listed sort of the history of how we've developed our group, various initiatives we've undertaken. There's a compilation of land acknowledgments that we've posted on our webpage, and other resources that you might find helpful. So I would encourage you not to feel obligated to reinvent the wheel. Please come and use whatever you find that would be helpful to you on that website at www.fccucc.org.
Great.
Marvin, I just dropped the link in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. I put the one of the links that Allison put in, put it on the roundup that I'm sending out. Also, Rich Stewart sends out a regular Wabanaki sovereignty newsletter once a month. And so if you would like to get signed up for that, please email him. And I'm grateful for that compilation and curation that you do each month. Maulian, is there anything, I think it's now 8:12, so let's finish up our time together. Is there anything you want to leave us with before we head out today?
Just thank you for the time. I'm so glad we pulled this together, and thank you, Rich and Marvin, for all your hard work pulling us together, and Reverend Chrissy and Reverend Lynette. Wonderful to meet you, and thank you for the space here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everybody. I'll stick around for a minute if anybody has any questions, but I appreciate your time tonight. I'm going to stop recording. I will share this. It's going to take me a couple of days to get the turnaround, and it's either going to be on my church's YouTube page, or it's going to be on the Maine conference page. But I'll make sure that information gets out to the link to this talk gets out to everybody too. So have a good night. Thanks. Enjoy I hope the rest of your Lent is meaningful as we look towards Easter.